Welcome back. This is All Up Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. A bit of breaking news to bring you before we get to our next section, and this is coming from the Prime Minister's spokesperson at the Daily Lobby briefing, saying that Theresa May is going to see the Queen tomorrow, which will be to trigger the dissolution of Parliament. So the PM going to the Queen tomorrow, and that, of course, really launches the election campaign proper. Now, there was a fair bit of mudslinging between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in the run-up to the US election, and so far the campaign here has seen Jeremy Corbyn's personality come in for some criticism, not least from the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who labelled the Labour leader a mutton-headed old mugwump. So, is politics getting too personal? I'm joined by the political presentation consultant Davies, Miranda Green, the FT journalist and former press secretary to the Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown, and Tom Baldwin, who was Ed Miliband's press secretary in the 2015 election. Hello to all of you. Tom Baldwin, you've got a bit of experience of this, haven't you, working with Ed Miliband about politics getting personal. Do you think we're getting a bit too mean?
I think it is getting more personal. I think that's a function of what flies on social media. That's what gets shared tends to be what's shocking, surprising, takes your interest. Now, I think the rest of the media then reflects that. And the worst thing about this is some parties are using this cynically. So I think in the last election you saw Michael Fallon come out and say that Ed Miliband was a backstabber because he stood against his brother. That was in order to distract attention from the headlines of the day, which were very damaging to the Conservative Party. It's what the ludicrously titled Sir Linton Crosby calls a dead cat strategy. If you don't like the discussion that's going on, you slap a dead cat on the table and suddenly everyone's talking about the dead cat instead. This is how I think the Conservative Party tending to use personal attacks. It is to distract attention from the issues they don't want to talk about. And there's no surprise that Boris Johnson did this the morning after his disastrous dinner, Theresa May's disastrous dinner with Jean-Claude Juncker. That they don't want to talk about what hard Brexit means. They want to distract attention from it. They want to distract attention from the fact that Brexit strategy is unravelling.
Is there an argument, though, that actually in politics personality does matter? Because the personality of the person making the decisions will influence, of course, the kind of decision that they make, and so people have got a right to know about it.
If you're ever sad enough to try reading a party's general election manifesto, you'll quickly discover that it's the perfect cure for insomnia. Politics only comes alive when it comes off the written page into the mouth of a politician, preferably the one with some personality. But let's face it, most politicians are the sort of people who can light up the House of Commons simply by walking out of it. So if you've got somebody that's slightly different, a bit more edge, a bit more spark, they actually draw people into the political process, and that actually must be a good thing.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I would agree with Tom that actually these endless personal insults are no longer different. So whilst in a micro sense, this strategy of distracting attention with a barrage of personal insults works for a couple of days, in fact, it can just come across to the public as an appalling, round of bickering, the sort of thing you actually turn off the radio to avoid. So I think some people might be able to get away with offering something fresh by avoiding these personal insults, but I think your point is right, Sophie. Essentially, the Conservative Party wants to insist that this election is about leadership qualities, so they'd be insane to avoid personal insults because they want the election to be about Jeremy Corbyn. And we're all speculating about when they might release the files and files of personal attack lines on Corbyn and McDonnell, which we presume that they have in a back room. So I think we probably need to steel ourselves and get used to it, because there'll be a lot more personal insults. They won't be edifying, but they are a brilliant way for the Conservative Party to prevent any debate on any of the other topics that might be up for discussion in the next 6 weeks.
I'm interested as well to think about politicians taking more responsibility for this themselves too, because people like personality politics. I mean, going back to Ed Miliband, who of course was subject to personal attacks, but since he's stepped down from his position of Labour leader, he seems to have got this sparkling personality. He's on social media making all these quips. I mean, why didn't we see a bit more of that personality during the last election campaign?
Ed's always had a very good sense of humour. I think there is a problem about how you come across as prime ministerial. I also think when you stop being leader of the Labour Party and stop being attacked day in, day out by the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Daily Telegraph and everybody else, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to be funny and relax. I don't think he could have made those kind of jokes when he was leader of the Labour Party. I don't think he'd have been allowed to by the media. I think he'd been ridiculed for it.
And Boris Johnson, I suppose, is the other example of this, isn't he? Someone who we're used to having this larger-than-life personality that seems to have been much more muted since he's come into office.
And we shouldn't feel too sorry for politicians. They're not exactly thin-skinned people. Usually when they hear an insult, especially a good insult, a funny one, they roar with laughter and hammer the table. The only thing... Politicians don't mind being insulted. The only thing that they really hate is being ignored.
Is that true, do you think?
I'm not sure I agree with that at all, actually. Most of the politicians that I've known well have been quite thin-skinned and take these insults really personally. And I think it's
Liberal
a mistake.
Democrats, perhaps, yeah.
No, in all parties. I actually think it's a huge mistake to think that just because people have got themselves into public life, they have no, sensitivities. I think they're generally very sensitive about these attacks, but they're unavoidable. And you're right, we shouldn't have too much sympathy because they've taken themselves into this position. But I do think it's a matter of some regret that we end up concentrating so much on personality. On the Ed Miliband point, I think, as a nation, we quite like a loser, to be honest. And once someone's no longer a threat, we're allowed to be affectionate about him by the media, who are no longer saying, do you really want this person on the steps of Downing Street? So we have to watch out for being played both ways, I think. Do
you think Labour need to up their game a bit?
In general?
Not in general, on the personality politics side of things. If the Conservatives are playing dirty, should Labour get real and start playing dirty as well?
I don't think they're going to win that game. I think the way the media is constructed, it's not a level playing field. I do think they need to turn around the personal frame that Theresa May has set for this election. She's saying it's about strong and stable leadership and about her. I think if you look below the surface, look at the transcript of her dinner with Juncker. That is not strong and stable leadership. That's a weak Prime Minister who can't deliver what she's promised on Brexit, knows it, is calling an election before the chickens come home to roost, and is not promising stable leadership, but actually setting Britain up for chaos in the future. That can be turned around. I don't think that's a personal attack, but that does go to the heart of the frame that she's trying to set about her leadership and her vision for the future.
So making it about the leadership question, not just kind of the personal insult. But
that means Labour has to have something to say about Brexit in the first place, which at the moment is trying to avoid the subject, which is another story.
I can still remember on the other side of the Atlantic when Donald Trump was unleashing a constant volley of what I even agree is horrible abuse. Michelle Obama, in her role as the chief cheerleader for Hillary Clinton, kept on saying, when they go low, we stay high. And they stayed on that lofty high ground and watched Trump's insults possibly galvanise all the voters in half a dozen swing states. So sometimes silence and sticking to the high ground doesn't necessarily work.
I think that's a really good point. On the other hand, there are massive risks for the Labour Party in going after Theresa May with personal attacks. The only risk to going after Corbyn is in some weird way triggering some sort of sympathy for him, which is quite unlikely. That didn't happen in 1983 when they went after Michael Foot, because it's a high-stakes decision who you choose as Prime Minister. If the Labour Party go after Theresa May on a personal level, the voters, unfortunately for the Labour Party, actually really like her, and they won't enjoy it. And there's also far too much still, I think, quite sort of low-level sexist commentary about Theresa May, and that would be a huge danger for the Labour Party.
I think that's right. I mean, there is another example, which is 1987, when Steve Hilton, who's now found fame in other areas, designed the Devil Eyes ad against Tony Blair.
Yes, yeah.
That eventually backfired because I think the Tories overplayed their hand, and they played it against someone who was essentially quite popular.
So in other words, you have to go in with the way that public opinion is moving. Okay.
I think the wind was blowing their way as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your thoughts on that subject.